What if surviving in the harsh wilderness did not require sophisticated technology, but only ingenious simplicity? Modern humans, finding themselves in the prairies or forests of North America, would rely on compasses, water filters, and tents. The indigenous peoples who lived there for centuries had a set of tools, each of which was the perfect answer to the challenges of the environment. These tools, made of stone, bone, and wood, allowed them not only to survive, but to thrive in conditions that seem extreme to us. Watch the video to the end to find out how a simple curved knife could build an entire house, and what item made from raw leather was vital to nomadic life on the Great Plains. I will reveal the best-kept secret: how entire peoples roamed the continent without knowing the wheel and transported all their belongings. Let's start with the fundamental problem of the Great Plains: mobility, because the Lakota and Cheyenne tribes were nomads. Transporting an entire camp, including tipis, utensils, and supplies, was a monumental task. The solution was the travois, a V-shaped frame that replaced a wagon. This device was ideally suited to a landscape where there were no roads and the ground was covered with grass or snow. The design was deceptively simple, but required a precise understanding of the materials and their properties. Two long poles, usually made of strong and light pine or ash, served as the basis for the entire structure. At the front, they were joined at an acute angle with rawhide straps. Closer to the rear ends, crossbars created a mesh or solid platform on which the load was placed. Initially, before the arrival of horses in North America, travois were relatively small. They were pulled by dogs that were specially bred for this purpose. This imposed serious restrictions on the weight and volume of goods that could be transported. Dog travois were vital, but they did not allow for the transport of large loads, such as frames for large dwellings. All of life was adapted to the capabilities of these small but hardy helpers. The arrival of the horse in the 17th and 18th centuries completely changed the culture of the plains, producing a veritable revolution. Travois immediately increased in size several times over to match the strength of the new animal. Now the V-shaped frame was attached to the horse's back with a special saddle or harness. Long poles dragged freely along the ground, gliding smoothly across the prairie. This made it possible to transport much heavier and bulkier loads.
Keep the horses steady there!
Watch the ropes on that travois.
The genius of the travois lay in the fact that its apparent disadvantages were its main advantages. The absence of wheels meant that it could not brake on rocks, get stuck in mud, or break its axle. The long poles glided smoothly over grass, bumps, small streams, and even snow. The device was incredibly easy to repair in the field. All that was needed for repairs were straps and readily available wood. The travois was not just a cargo platform, but a multifunctional tool integrated into everyday life. It was an example of ideal resource conservation and engineering. Upon arrival at a new campsite, the travois was dismantled, and its long, straight poles immediately became the basis for the frame of a teepee. Thus, in a matter of minutes, the vehicle became an integral part of the dwelling. The travois is a brilliant example of how simple geometry solves a complex logistical problem. It is interesting to see how this topic is perceived in different parts of the world. Where are you from? Did you know about this simple but important invention? Please share your thoughts on this topic and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Are you ready to learn the truth about how Native Americans stored their most valuable possessions without locks or chests while constantly on the move? For a nomadic people, storing and protecting supplies was a top priority. They needed a container that was lightweight, incredibly durable, protected against moisture, and could withstand the rigors of constant travel. The solution was the parfleche, a unique container made of rawhide that was widely used by the tribes of the Great Plains. The name parfleche comes from the French words parer, to parry, and flèche, arrow. This name, given by French trappers, hints at the incredible strength of the material, which, when dry, was capable of deflecting an arrow. It was not tanned, soft leather, but rawhide. The skin was carefully cleaned of wool and fat, stretched on a frame, and dried in the sun until it was rock hard. The manufacture of parfleche was an art form practiced by women. After drying, the skin became as hard as modern plywood. To give it the desired shape, it was soaked just enough to be able to cut out a large rectangle. This rectangle was then folded according to a specific pattern to obtain a durable and functional container. The folding process was the key to making parfleche. Most often, it was shaped like an envelope. First, the short edges of the rectangular piece of leather were folded inward, and then the long side flaps were folded on top of each other. The entire structure was securely fastened with leather straps that were threaded through specially made holes. This created a tight and securely closed package. Parfleche bags were not just utilitarian items, they were true canvases for art. The women of the tribe painted them with bright and intricate geometric patterns. The paints were made from readily available mineral pigments mixed with fat or vegetable glue. Each pattern had its own symbolic meaning and was often unique to a particular family. The main function of the parfleche was to store and transport pemmican, a concentrated and dried food. The tough rawhide provided reliable protection for food against moisture and damage. Parfleche bags were also used to store dried meat, herbs, clothing, tools, and personal items. It was a universal suitcase for nomads. The parfleche was the ideal solution for a mobile lifestyle, combining durability, lightness, and protection. But how did people create such precise and neat holes in leather, as hard as wood for sewing straps? In the next chapter, we will look at a tool that was indispensable for any sewing work, from creating a parfleche to sewing a tipe. What I am about to show you looks deceptively simple, but without this small object, no tipi or pair of moccasins would have been made. We often marvel at the complex structures of indigenous peoples, but we forget about the most important tool that made it all possible. The bone awl is a modest but absolutely indispensable tool that was in the arsenal of every indigenous woman. The main problem when working with leather, especially thick rawhide or dense tanned leather, is its incredible strength. It was impossible to pierce it with a regular sewing needle, even if one were available. A special tool was needed to first make a neat hole through which a tendon thread could then be passed. Awls were made from the strongest bones that could be found. Preference was given to the leg bones of large herbivores, as they were dense, massive, and did not break under load. After rough cutting the blank, the bone was long and patiently ground on sandstone. This process brought the tip to perfect smoothness and sharpness. The process of making such a seemingly simple tool required time and great patience. The bone was first split to obtain a blank of the desired size and shape. Then it was sharpened and shaped. Particular attention was paid to the tip. It had to be not only sharp as a needle, but also perfectly smooth so as not to tear the material, but to carefully spread its fibers. The main and daily use of the awl was sewing. The craftswoman placed two pieces of leather together and made a series of precise holes with a bone awl. Then, using thread made from dried and split-back tendons, the pieces were sewn together. This method allowed for incredibly strong and virtually waterproof seams. Without a bone awl, it would have been impossible to sew the giant covering for the teepee. It was a monumental task that required joining dozens of large pieces of leather. Each seam had to withstand the hurricane-force winds of the Great Plains. The awl was the key to creating this incredible strength, allowing for reliable stitches. The same was true for making clothes, especially moccasins. Moccasins required very precise and delicate sewing to fit the foot perfectly and withstand constant wear and tear. The awl allowed for small and neat holes for the stitches needed for such delicate work. The comfort and health of the feet depended on the quality of these stitches. This simple bone tool was the basis for the creation of clothing, dwellings, and transport containers. It is proof that the most important tools are not always the most complex. If you enjoyed this detailed look at a seemingly obvious object, please like this video. What if I told you that Native Americans invented a complex mechanical tool with a flywheel long before the arrival of Europeans? When we talk about making fire, what comes to mind is simply rubbing sticks together with our palms.
This stone weight, the flywheel, it stores the energy. That is how we spin it fast enough to catch the spark.
But the Iroquois and other peoples of the eastern woodlands had a much more sophisticated and effective mechanism. The pump drill was an ingenious device that used the laws of physics to produce fire or drill holes. The device consisted of several key, precisely fitted parts. The vertical rod, drill bit, was the main working element, made from a straight piece of hard wood. A heavy flywheel, a perfectly balanced disc made of stone, wood, or clay, was tightly fitted onto it. This flywheel provided the inertia necessary for continuous rotation. The most important part was the drive mechanism. It consisted of a horizontal crossbar with a large hole in the center through which the vertical rod passed freely. A strong leather belt was attached to the ends of this crossbar. The same belt was tied to the top of the rod. To start the drill, the belt was first wound around the rod, which caused the crossbar to rise. The operator then pressed down sharply on the crossbar. This downward movement, similar to a pump, caused the rod to spin at a very high speed. Thanks to the inertia created by the heavy flywheel, the rod continued to rotate, winding the belt back, but in the opposite direction. As soon as the belt was wound up again, the crossbar rose up on its own. The operator pressed down on it again, and the cycle repeated. Rhythmic up and down presses maintained continuous high-speed rotation of the rod in one direction and then the other. This was much more efficient than rotating it with the palms of the hands. To produce fire, the lower end of the rod was inserted into a recess in a dry board, flint. The high speed of rotation combined with pressure quickly created a smoldering ember. This method was much faster and required significantly less physical effort than other methods. The pump drill shows that simple cultures possessed truly sophisticated and effective technologies. This tool solved the problem of friction and drilling with true engineering elegance. But how was the problem of large-scale food production solved, especially among sedentary peoples? In the next chapter, we will talk about stationary traps. Unlike the nomads of the plains, many peoples of the eastern woods and subarctic led more sedentary lifestyles, relying heavily on water resources. For them, the key task was to catch fish in large quantities. These stocks had to be sufficient to feed an entire settlement for many months. One of the most effective methods was the construction of fish weirs. A fish weir is not a net or a fishing rod that catches one fish at a time. It was a large-scale and complex engineering structure built directly in the riverbed. Its main purpose was not to catch a single fish, but to block the river. This allowed the entire flow of fish going to spawn to be directed and concentrated in one place, where it could be easily collected. Hundreds, if not thousands, of wooden stakes were required to build such a dam. They were made from strong woods such as willow or alder, and one end was sharpened. A huge number of flexible rods were also needed for weaving, as well as heavy stones to reinforce the entire structure. The construction was a collective effort involving the entire settlement. The stakes were methodically driven into the riverbed in rows. These rows often formed a V shape, with the points facing downstream. Flexible rods were tightly woven between the stakes, creating a fence through which water could pass freely, but fish could not. At the very top of this V-shaped funnel, a small passage was deliberately left. This passage led straight into a trap, a fenced-in chamber or large basket, versha, also woven from rods. Fish swimming upstream inevitably bumped into the walls of the dam. Instinctively, they moved along them in search of a passage and ended up in this only exit. Once inside the trap chamber, through the narrow entrance, the fish could no longer find their way back out. All that remained for the people to do was to come regularly and collect the catch from this trap, using nets or simply their hands. It was a passive but incredibly productive method of obtaining food.
Look at that huge fish, Father! It's still moving!
Careful, everyone. Let's get it secured.
Such weirs were often permanent structures that were used year after year. Their design was stable and did not cause irreversible damage to the river, as they did not block it completely. They were designed for the mass migration of fish during a specific season, such as during the spawning season for salmon or eel. Want to know the secret that allowed people not only to survive, but to actively move around and thrive in a world buried under meters of snow? For the peoples of the subarctic, such as the Cree and Athabascan, winter was the ultimate test. Deep, loose snow made it almost impossible to move through the forest. The solution to this problem was snowshoes, a device that today seems like sports equipment, but back then was the key to survival. The principle of snowshoes is based on a simple law of physics: weight distribution. A person's weight is distributed over a much larger surface area. This prevents them from sinking deep into the snow. It is the same effect as standing on a wide board rather than on a thin heel. The manufacture of snowshoes was a high art that required knowledge and patience. The frame was made of strong and flexible wood, such as ash or birch. The wood was steamed over a fire or in hot water for a long time. This made it flexible and allowed it to be bent into the desired shape, which was then fixed. There were dozens of different shapes of snowshoes, each perfectly suited to its type of terrain. There were long, narrow snowshoes with a tail for fast travel across open spaces. There were also short, wide, almost round bear paws. They were slower, but allowed for excellent maneuverability in dense forests. The main secret of the snowshoe was in the weaving of its deck. The interior of the frame was filled with a tight mesh of rawhide straps. This weave had to be strong enough to support a person's weight. At the same time, it had to be loose enough for loose snow to fall through it rather than accumulate on top. Snowshoes brilliantly solved the problem of moving through deep snow. But how did people carry heavy loads in these harsh conditions, especially where there were no dogs? In the next chapter, we will look at a simple but ingenious device for carrying heavy loads. In the dense forests of the eastern woodlands, or on mountain trails where neither travois nor horses could pass, the entire weight of the load fell on the human back. But carrying a heavy backpack that pulls on the shoulders is inefficient and extremely tiring. The peoples of these regions, including the Iroquois, used another, much more effective method: the tump line, or head strap. A head strap is essentially a wide and very strong strap. Its key feature is that it was not thrown over the shoulders, but over the forehead or the top of the head. The long ends of this strap were attached to the load: a large woven basket, a bundle of firewood, or a bundle of belongings. This load was placed on the porter's back. The genius of this method lies in pure biomechanics. It allowed the entire weight of the load to be transferred directly to the strongest bone structure in the human body, the spine. This completely freed up the arms and shoulders. It also allowed the back to be kept straight, which reduced fatigue and the risk of injury. The strap itself was a true work of art. The central part, which rested on the forehead, was wide. It was often woven from plant fibers or made of soft leather so that it would not rub. Long, sturdy straps made of rawhide were attached to the ends of this wide part to secure the load. The tumpline was used very rationally. The load, for example, a large woven basket, was first placed on it. Then the straps of the tumpline were tied around the load. The person stood with their back to the load, leaned forward slightly, and threw the strap over their forehead. Then they straightened up, using the strength of their legs and back, and lifted the load onto their back. This method allowed incredibly heavy loads to be carried over very long distances. People who had been accustomed to the tumpline since childhood could carry weights equal to their own body weight. This was especially important when carrying supplies or portaging. Portaging was the term used to describe the transport of canoes and all cargo overland between rivers or around rapids. For the peoples of the forest zone, from the Great Lakes to the subarctic, wood was the main and most important material. They made literally everything out of it. Canoe frames, canoes themselves, paddles, tool handles, snowshoes, bowls, spoons. To work with wood, they needed a versatile and effective tool. This tool was the crooked knife, or mokotagan. This knife had a very distinctive and recognizable shape. Its blade was noticeably curved at the end, and the handle was asymmetrical, often made to fit the shape of the owner's hand. The knife was not designed to be used in a cutting motion away from the body, but rather for planing and pulling towards the body. It was held in the fist, with the blade facing up or to the side. The working motion was similar to how a person peels a vegetable, but with much more effort. All the strength of the arm and shoulder was put into this pulling, planing motion. This gave incredible control over the process. Initially, before the widespread use of metal, the blades for such knives were made from sharpened beaver incisors. Beaver teeth are naturally curved and incredibly sharp. Later, with the arrival of Europeans, the blades began to be forged from metal. Craftsmen often reworked old files, blades, or any available scrap metal for this purpose. The curved knife was a universal woodworking tool that could be held in one hand. It could be used to plane canoe paddles, giving them a perfectly smooth and hydrodynamic shape. It was used to carve out the inside of wooden bowls and spoons, using the curve of the blade like a spoon cutter. It was absolutely indispensable in the manufacture of snowshoes. It was used to plane and bend the wooden frame, removing excess material. In the construction of a classic birch bark canoe, it was used to fit numerous parts of the cedar frames. They were made perfectly smooth so that they would not tear the fragile birch bark covering. Despite its apparent roughness, this knife allowed for the highest precision. An experienced craftsman could use it to remove the thinnest, almost transparent shavings. It was much more effective than a regular straight knife for giving wood complex, curved, and smooth shapes. In the culture of the Great Plains, which was almost entirely based on the use of the resources of a single animal, hides were perhaps the most valuable material. They were used to make clothing, moccasins, beds, coverings for teepees, and parfleche. But in order for a hide to be transformed from raw material into soft suede or durable rawhide, it had to undergo a complex processing process. The main problem was that fresh hides are covered on the inside with a layer of fat and tissue residue. If these are not removed immediately, the hide will begin to rot, become stiff, and unusable. The task was to completely and thoroughly clean the entire inner surface without damaging the skin itself. A special scraper was used for this difficult and painstaking work. Before the advent of metal, these scrapers were made of stone, such as flint, quartzite, or other hard minerals. The blade had a semicircular or straight cutting edge, which was carefully sharpened. The stone blade was short and thick to withstand high pressure. It was attached to the handle with rawhide straps. There were two main types of handles. One was straight, similar to a modern chisel. The other, more complex and effective, was L-shaped, made of bone or wood. The L-shaped scraper was the pinnacle of ergonomics for this task. The stone blade was attached to the short end of the L, and the long end served as a handle. This allowed the woman doing the work to apply her entire body weight. She worked with both hands, pushing the tool away from her. The process itself was very laborious. The skin was spread out on the ground and secured with stakes. The woman would kneel and methodically plane the skin, pushing the scraper away from her. It was monotonous work that required tremendous physical strength and endurance. The blade of the scraper had to be sharp enough to cut through the fat, but not cut through the skin itself. The women were true experts at sharpening these tools. The scraper had to be constantly sharpened during the process to remain effective. Survival in the prairies or subarctic forests depended not only on the ability to obtain food, but also on the ability to preserve it. Meat could be abundant in one season and completely absent in another. Plains peoples such as the Comanche and Lakota developed an almost perfect product for long-term storage: pemmican. Pemmican is not just dried meat, as one might think. It is a complex, high-energy composite product that could be stored for years without any refrigeration. It consisted of 3 main ingredients: thoroughly dried meat, rendered fat, and in some variations, crushed berries. The first step was to prepare the meat. The meat was cut into very thin strips or sheets. These strips were hung on wooden frames and dried in the sun. Sometimes they were dried over a slow fire, which gave the product a slight smoky flavor. The meat was dried until it became as brittle as chips. After complete drying, there was almost no moisture left in the meat, which stopped the growth of bacteria. The dried meat was then placed on a large, flat stone and beaten with another stone. It was ground into a fine powder, similar to flour. This meat powder was the basis of pemmican. It was light and took up very little space. Crushed dried berries were often added to the meat powder. Wild cherries or erga berries were most commonly used. The berries were thoroughly dried, crushed together with the seeds, and mixed with the meat. They added not only flavor, but also important vitamins and carbohydrates. The most important ingredient was rendered fat. The fat was carefully melted over low heat. During this process, it was cleaned of all impurities and tissue residues. In its pure, rendered form, fat is a powerful natural preservative that does not spoil for a very long time. Next, the ingredients were mixed. Meat powder and berries were poured into a large container, often made of animal skin. Then hot rendered fat was poured into this dry mixture. The fat completely saturated all the ingredients and, as it solidified, bound them into a single, incredibly dense mass. We have looked at 10 ingenious devices born out of a deep understanding of nature and materials. From the travois, which allowed entire peoples to move, to pemmican, which allowed them to survive hungry winters. Each of these inventions, snowshoes, curved knives, bone awls, was a perfect and elegant response to a specific environmental challenge. What other aspects of the daily life or technologies of the indigenous peoples of North America would you like to see in future videos? Perhaps you are interested in the construction of dwellings, such as the longhouses of the Iroquois, or methods of navigating by the stars. Suggest your topics in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on new research.